Here.
Ms. Keys Gamara,
Here.
Mr. Frisch,
Hello.
hi there. Ms. Cowan,
Good afternoon.
Ms. McLaughlin,
Here.
Ms. Heisler-Heiser,
I'm here.
Anderson,
Here, thank you.
Ms. Bakarski,
I'm here.
Ms. Darren Kofax,
Here, good afternoon.
all right, I just went down my list. Ms. Marin, Ms. Corbett Sanders,
Good afternoon.
all right, Ms. Marin. All right, hopefully she will be joining us soon. This afternoon, similar to what we did this morning, is we are beginning a new lengthy process that happens annually. Today is our first work session related to our capital improvement program. So two different documents were posted on board docs related to this, our presentation that we will hear from facilities and transportation, and also a report that is put together each year on that analyzes our the membership of all of our students across the system. As you'll hear in the presentation, this year, of course, our numbers look a little bit different than they usually do as we're dealing with COVID-19. But this work session is for informational purposes only for the school board. And I do see Ms. Marin that you're with us now. Thank you.
Thank
you. And so, as I mentioned, this begins our capital improvement program season, which will run now through February. It provides our annual update of membership changes for this from the previous school year, from the school year 2019-2020 to this particular school year 2020-21. The information is the initial driver for school capacity evaluations and discussions. It serves as the basis for our annual CIP report. Again, this is for information purposes, and we will have ample opportunity to delve further into the capital improvement program and the subsequent at a subsequent meeting with where we talk about new development across the county, an additional CIP presentation, another work session, and a public hearing, both planned in January. And our staff presentation will go through all of that today. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Plattenberg for that presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan and Mr. Frisch, and thank you so much. I'd like to just say thank you so much to Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Ivy, and especially Mr. Smith, for all their support. We have been dealing, as you know, as you have been dealing with a myriad of issues and navigating through troubleshooting all of them as we support our returning to school. And we wanted to take a minute to go through today's presentation really about the membership trends. Now, this is for information. It is the beginning or the precursor of the CIP season that kicks off. And as part of that, there are a number of meetings that will be held where the school board will have the opportunity to delve in further to a number of the different issues. But this is the first really snapshot and look at what the membership trends have been. And given the pandemic, it's certainly a very challenging, as I said earlier, time. And this data that we're going to go through briefly this afternoon really reflects that. So on slide 2, the background of this, the membership trends report is updated annually by the Office of Facilities Planning Services. It represents data on changes in student membership from school year 2019-2020 to 2020-2021. The data presented in the report is a snapshot in time as of September 30th for both those school years. The report helps inform the student membership projection set and school capacity evaluations that are part of the capital improvement program, which forms the basis for the recommendations that will be coming forth in the capital improvement program, which will be coming up later. The next slide, on slide 3, and the capital improvement program really is, as you recall, is a short-range plan, a 5-year roadmap for what we see as the trends. It's an annually reviewed and updated of the current student membership, the 5-year membership projections, and facilities data. A number of the new development projects have been proposed as part of the planning initiatives across Fairfax County, some of which may impact enrollment within FCPS, and staff from both the county and the schools will be discussing developments within the county and how we work together on December 15th, 2020. The CIP for fiscal year 2022 to 2026 will be presented and is scheduled for new business on December 17th. The CIP then school board work session is scheduled for January 5th, 2021, and a public hearing scheduled for January 7th, 2021, with CIP action scheduled for February 4th of 2021. So you can see, we begin with this information, this data, if you will, to talk about what the trends are, but there's going to be many opportunities to delve much further into the entire CIP process and with the new development trends provided by our friends at the county. On slide 4, the COVID-19 pandemic has really had an impact on our overall FCPS membership. We saw a decline in student membership, a lower birth to kindergarten ratio, and an increase in student withdrawals over the summer, which has resulted in a negative net migration for school years 2020-2021. Whether these trends are temporary for school year 2020 and 2021 will depend on many factors, including the future course of the pandemic and truly economic conditions. Data associated with these changes has been included in the report and are going to be presented in the following slides for the presentation. Information presented in this report is also available on the facilities and membership dashboards. On slide 5, we'll go ahead and speak to the fact that there are individual key data points that we'll talk about. On table 1 on page 6 of the report, it shows the changes in membership by school level from 2019 to 2020 to school year 2020-2021. The total membership for school year 2020-2021 is 180,151. This total student membership decreased by 8,859 students. It's important to note that the elementary school membership decreased by 7,729 students, of which kindergarten membership decreased by 2,208 students. Those data points we'll get to a little bit more, and they are significant. Middle school membership decreased by only 217, and high school membership decreased by 392 students. The total membership within centers and alternative programs decreased by 356, and the total membership within other categories decreased by 165. Moving on to the next slide. On table 2 on page 6, and by the way, up at the top of each of these slides, you will see a reference page, and that is for the attachment that you were provided of the actual report itself, which is a myriad of information for your reference and really goes individual school by schools, by region, by pyramid, et cetera. But on table 2 on page 6 of the report, it shows the change in membership by region from 2019 to 2020 to 2020-2021. Membership decreased in all 5 regions. Region 1 decreased by 2,100, Region 2 decreased by 1,700, Region 3 decreased by 2,000, Region 4 decreased by 1,400, and Region 5 decreased by 1,112. On the next slide, slide 7, table 3 on page 7 of the report shows the change in membership by high school pyramid from the same period. Membership decreased in 26 high school pyramids and remained the same in 1 high school pyramid. Thomas Jefferson has no change in membership from the last year. The top 6 school pyramids with the largest change in membership are Mount Vernon, a decrease of 628, West Potomac, a decrease of 553, Chantilly, a decrease of 532, Madison, a decrease of 499, Herndon and Oakton, a decrease of 442. The next slide, on table 9 on page 13 of the report, it shows the change in membership by elementary school for this time period. Membership decreased in 135 of our elementary schools and increased in 3 of the elementary schools. The top Two elementary schools with the largest decline were Sangster, a decrease of 118, and Spring Hill with a decrease of 162. Fort Belvoir Primary was a decrease of 675, and Fort Belvoir Upper, 79. They show a larger change due to changes in our grade configuration. As you'll recall, we made that change last year. The change is also seen in McNair of a decrease of 675 since McNair Upper opened. Table 15 on page 22 of the report shows the change in membership by middle school. Membership decreased in 14 of the middle schools and it increased in 12. The two top middle schools with the largest decline were Thoreau with 90 and also Rocky Run with 100 decrease. Table 20 on page 27 of the report shows the change in membership by high school from the same period. The membership decreased in 16 high schools and increased in 10 high schools and remained the same at one, as I mentioned, Thomas Jefferson. Again, the two high schools with the largest decline were Justice with 104 and Mountain View with 116. On slide 9, there are three fundamental factors that are reviewed in this report and that aid in the evaluation of the change in total membership from the school years of the period I've discussed. A birth to kindergarten ratio, the migration of the transfer of students are some of the key elements that we'll be going through. The birth to kindergarten ratio results from a comparison, as you'll recall, between the number of births at a point in time and the kindergarten student membership 5, in some cases 6 years later, as students are available for kindergarten when they've turned 5 years old prior to September 30th of any given school year. The migration refers to the number of students entering, that's what we call in-migration, and leaving, what we call out-migration of the school division. The net migration is a term that we use to describe the total number of students gained or withdrawn from the school division after the number of new students and the number of withdrawal students are added together. Transfers are students who reside within one school boundary and are assigned to that school, what we term a base school, but attend a school in a different boundary, what we call the attending school. The net transfers is a term that is used to describe the difference between the total number of students transferring in the attending school and the total number of students transferring out of the base school. The information associated with these factors that are presented here in this report is also available in the facilities membership dashboards. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about the historical and current birth to kindergarten. You'll see kind of a significant drop in this year. Figure 1 on page 32 of the report illustrates the actual number of births, kindergarten membership, and the birth to kindergarten ratio from school years 2011-2012 to school years 2020 to 2021. In this graph, the number of births that are shown in blue, the kindergarten membership is in green, and the birth to kindergarten ratio in yellow. And the yellow one is the one that I find most interesting because the kindergarten membership declined from 13,103 in the school year 2019-2020 to 10,895 in school year 2020 to 2021. That's a difference of the 2,208 students that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation and resulted in a decrease in the birth to kindergarten ratio from 87% to 75%. And that's a significant decline that's worthy of note. The next slide, on slide 11, table 24 on page 32 of the report shows the change in the birth to kindergarten ratio by region from school years 2019 to 2020 and 2020 to 2021. The birth to kindergarten ratio decreased in all 5 regions. Region 1 and 3 decreased by 11%, Region 2 decreased by 9%, Region 4 decreased by 16%, and Region 5 decreased by 12%. On the next slide, slide 12, table 25 on page 33 of the report shows the change in the birth to kindergarten ratio by high school pyramid from the school year 2019-2020 to school year 2020 to 2021. The ratio increased in 2 high school pyramids and decreased in 22 high school pyramids. The top 6 high school pyramids with the largest change in birth to kindergarten ratio from school year 2019 to 2020 to 2020-2021 are McLean at 11%, Oakton at 5% with a positive change, West Springfield at a negative 20%, West Potomac and Lake Braddock at 25%, and Woodson at 26% with a negative change. At the high school level, the counts for Bryant and also Mountain View and Thomas Jefferson are represented as individual pyramids. for the purpose of this report. On the next slide, slide 13, figure 2 on page 40, it illustrates the net migration trend from school year 2012 to 2013 to school year 2020 to 2021. The net migration decreased from 1,725 students in the last sequence of years to a negative 5,000 students, negative 4,953 in school years 2020 to 2021. The blue bar in the graph shows the net migration, which includes the net migration at Thomas Jefferson High School as well. The yellow bar shows the net migration at Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson High School, of course, is the governing school for grades 9 through 12, and students attending from the city of Fairfax, the counties of Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, and Prince William. Slide 14 on table 27 of page 41 of the report shows the net migration by school level. There was a negative net migration at the elementary and middle school level and a positive net migration at the high school level in school year 2020-2021. There was a negative net migration within centers and alternative programs and the other category. From school year 2019 to 2020 to school year 2020 to 2021, the net migration decreased at the elementary school level by 4,646, at the middle school level by 676, and then the high school level by 1,304. The net migration increased by 1 within the centers and alternative programs and decreased by 53 with the other category. On slide 15, it references table 28 on page 21 of the report. It shows the net migration by region. There was negative net migration within all 5 regions, centers, and alternative programs and other categories. And as I said, the data reflected here shows a region 1 of 1,560, region 2 by 1,760, region 3 by 1,283, region 4 by 1,206, region 5 by 817. The net migration increased by 1 within the centers and the alternative programs and by negative 53 within the other category. Slide 16 talks about the top 6 high school pyramids with the largest change in net migration. And as I've spent a lot of time on net migration, I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the next slide, which really talks about withdrawals. And I know this is something that, our outmigration refers to students who withdraw from the school division on or before September 30th. The outmigration includes students that withdraw from the system throughout the school year. Summer student withdrawals are reported to the Virginia Department of Education as part of our student record collection, or SRC. Summer withdrawals are students who reported active in the end of this year on the student record collection from previous school year have not returned by September 30th of the current school year. Students who return to FCPS on September 30th would not be considered a summer withdrawal. So students who show up on the first day of school but withdraw after the first few days, the first day of school, are not considered summer withdrawals because they did attend school for at least 1 day. Those students would now be regular term withdrawals for the next sequence of data that we would be providing next year. So the number of withdrawals and the outmigration do not match, and they don't match since the withdrawals are currently only available for the summer, and it is ongoing. And the outmigration is based upon the period of time of the snapshot from September from one year to September of the following year. So that's why if in your head you were thinking these numbers didn't match what you showed in terms of net migration and withdrawals, there may be a disconnect. This withdrawal information is particularly of interest given the pandemic because it was at the end of the school year, if you will, or summer withdrawals. This is voluntary data that's provided by parents if they choose. And therefore the numbers don't add to our total decrease of some 8,800 students that I mentioned at the beginning. But it is rather telling as the data reflect the points or the reasons why families may have chosen to withdraw from our system. And if you look at the theme on this slide that I'm sure a lot of you have delved into, when you look at those that have chosen private home school or private school religious school or private school non-religious school, when you look at that, there's a significant increase in the number from the prior year, over like 200 some students in terms of withdrawal. And when you look at other, you have some increase of approximately 190 students. So that is pretty, I think, informing as to some of the reasons families have chosen during this pandemic to withdraw from the current school division. On slide 18, on table 51 on page 74 of the report, it shows the net transfers by school, and the total net transfers for the school year 2020-2021 is 499 students. Net transfer is negative at the elementary, middle, and high schools, and positive within centers and alternative programs and other categories. From school year 2019 to 2020 to school year 2020-2021, the net transfers increased at the elementary school level by 175 students, at the middle school level by 29, and the high school level by 341. They decreased with the centers and alternative programs by 356 and the other category by 165. Transfer and membership numbers include students that attend FCPS schools and reside outside Fairfax County in the city of Fairfax. And they do not include students that attend FCPS school and reside outside Fairfax County in the city of Fairfax. On the next slide, on slide 19, we show the reasons for the transfers. Table 50 on page 72 of the report provides the information on the transfer categories and the reasons. On figure 7 on page 73 of the report, it shows the transfers by reason for 2019-2020 and 2020-2021. The top 3 reasons provided for the transfer were as follows. 26% of the transfers were to access the advanced academic program. 21% were to enter special ed programs, education programs, and 18% were related to reasons considered within the student transfer regulation, or Regulation 2230. When you look at the top 3 reasons, provided for school year 2020-21 are 29% for advanced academic, 21% to enter special education programs, and 18% related reasons considered with student transfer reg, as I mentioned, 2230. The category that's listed as undetermined includes students transferring from non-Fairfax residents, foster care, the Fairfax County Community Pre-K, resident and temporary housing, cluster placements or global STEM, and sometimes regional placement. It also includes students without a reported transfer reason. So the next slide 20, shows the net transfers by region for the school year 2020-2021. The reference is on table 52 on page 74. There's a negative net transfer within the regions as akin to what we've mentioned before within region 1, 3, 4, and 5, and a negative net transfer within region 2. So from school year 2019 to 2020 to school year 2020-2021, the net transfers increased within region 1 by 119 students, within region 2 by 189, within region 3 by 94, within region 4 by 93, and within region 5 by 50. The transfer and membership includes, the numbers include students that attended in the FCPS school and reside outside Fairfax County and the city of Fairfax. Transferred out membership doesn't include the students that attend any of our schools and reside outside the county and the city of Fairfax. On slide 21, and almost getting to the end, this slide is table 53, which is shown on page 75 of the attached report. It shows the net transfers by high school pyramid for the same time period. There's a positive net transfer in 9 high school pyramids, while a negative net transfer occurred in 18. The top 6 high school pyramids with the largest change in net transfers are Centerville at 127, Falls Church at 124, Fairfax at 123, Bryant at -66, Mountain View at -116, and Chantilly a decrease of 151. As noted, at the high school level, counts for Bryant High School, Mountain View High School, and Thomas Jefferson High School are separated as individual pyramids. So slide 22, we talk about the time frame. This, as I said before, there's no board action or decision that's required at this time, is really the information that we provide to kick off really the Capital Improvement Program or CIP season. The CIP season includes a number of dates where we will have the opportunity to actually delve further into things that may be impacting some of this change beyond the pandemic and beyond COVID. We have the new development that's scheduled for December 15th. That's where the county comes in and talks about new development and growth. And it's certainly a spirited conversation between magisterial and at-large members with the county development folks as to what they're seeing and trends and how we may be able to work together collaboratively to address the growth that may anticipate it in those areas. Then we present as new business on December 17th, the Capital Improvement Program. We then have a subsequent work session, the school board work session on January 5th, a public hearing on January 7th, and then subsequent potential action and consideration by the school board on February 4th. The importance of this information, as you heard from Ms. Burton's presentation earlier, is that it does impact some of the things related to the budget, and it does impact some of the conversations regarding staffing and the like, and how that may be addressed. So that really concludes, again, this information that's being provided as a part of this trends report and subsequent report document that has each individual school by pyramid and a wealth of depth and breadth of information for your purview. So with that, I thank you very much, Ms. Tolan and Mr. Frisch, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, for that thorough presentation that goes with a very large report with very detailed information. Thanks for putting all that together. I do see Laura Jane Cohen has her hand up, so we will start with you, Ms. Cohen.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Mr. Plattenberg and team, as always, for your awesome work. You know, I will say I definitely have heard this real concern over the last few weeks, certainly from my principals. And one of the biggest concerns, I have twofold. The biggest concern immediately is what will happen when we look at those kindergarten numbers. I'm having principals who are continuing to say to me that what they are hearing from many of their folks who pulled their kids, their kindergartners, you know, as soon as kindergartners come back on the 16th, that they are going to throw them into the mix. And so I'm wondering, as a system, and this may be more geared for other members of the team as well to help respond. But, you know, I guess I would say, number one, what is our response and preparation for that? And then number two, which is a much longer term, one of the biggest things that I'm hearing is folks who decided to delay enrolling their kindergartners and will have them enroll next year, which would cause massive fluctuations in what we normally predict as a year. So short-term, long-term, kindergarten problems, how are we going to solve this?
Well, absolutely, Ms. Cohen, you raised a really good question, and we've been hearing that anecdotal information as well. And the concern is, as we always state, when we have outliers, we have to proceed with caution and not make any drastic changes. We have staffing at the levels that were provided from the prior year. If in the event, and this will get into the staffing and more into the budget presentations that Ms. Burton was alluding to, we have to be really strategic and targeted, knowing that what we have seen is an apparition. I have not seen this much of a decrease at the kindergarten level. When you take 2,208 students at the kindergarten level alone, that's telling. And that tells me intuitively as a parent that families have chosen, for whatever reason, their personal reasons, to not enroll their students at this time. I've also heard the same things you allude to, that once we get beyond this pandemic, once we get a handle on COVID, if and when that ever does occur, that they want to re-engage and rehab their students back in the schools and in the programs. So one of the items that I think is fortuitous about the decision to request families to update their information about in-person or online learning is that we've seen an increase in the trending at the elementary level for students. Mr. Presidio has provided an increase at the elementary level for students wanting to come back more in person. That affects a number of different things, not only from trying to get the in-person learning up and going, but also the transportation issues and all of the other logistical things that are associated with it. But you're absolutely correct. So short term, we're taking a look at that really with our eyes wide open about how the impact may be, not only from our parents updating, but also the anecdotal information about parents saying that they intend on having their children attend as soon as they possibly can. And then the second thing is making sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation from a staffing perspective to where we're out trying to find teachers that when there's already a shortage. So I've talked to the neighboring school divisions, Arlington, Loudoun, Prince William. They're all taking different approaches given their communities, if you will. Loudon is continuing to project from a staff perspective. This isn't from the board. From a staff perspective, they're continuing to move forward with their increase in their projections for their draft CIP conversations. Arlington is staying the course level with where they are. They're seeing a big dip considerably for a school division of their size. And Prince William is kind of middle of the road. They think they're going to stay the course with a slight increase shown, even though they're having some decreasing numbers at this point. So the bottom line is we have to not only think about that strategically and then look into the future and recognize what you point out. If we all of a sudden have people all returning, we need to make sure that we're positioned that we can go ahead and accommodate that growth or that return.
Are we giving principals, my concern is that we see, and I live in a predominantly military area, but what we've continued to see is years where principals continue to give feedback that they know the trends that happen in their school, and yet they scurry to try to hire folks later because they really were not given the benefit of the doubt of knowing what happens and how the trends work in their schools. And so I guess my concern is, are we making sure that we're listening to our principals of what they're hearing? Because I know that it would be very difficult to try to assess folks who have disenrolled. If we're not reaching out to those folks who we're hearing anecdotally are saying they're going to come back on the 16th, then are we listening to our principals who are hearing some of that in their community?
Well, I can tell you, Ms. Cohen, I'm sorry, Dr. Brim, was going to say, but I'll just say real quick that through our staffing meetings, we listen to our principals every year, and some are a little conservative in those meetings, and some are less conservative in what they believe is going to occur. But we do listen to them as part of the process, and Dr. Brabrand wants to add to it, I believe.
Laura Jane, Jeff said it brilliantly. 2 nuggets. Nugget number 1, we staffed kindergarten on the numbers that we expected, not the dip in enrollment. So we still have kindergarten staffing. I mean, to be completely candid, we have more kindergarten. We are overstaffed at kindergarten. Now, if everybody comes back that we projected in the next month or two, right, and we're trying to still do it at 50% capacity, yes, there may be some additional challenges, and we're going to have to update you on that. An early trend for the existing folks who were, again, are already in our system but chose virtual versus in person is more in person. This discussion is people who aren't in the system at all coming back in. But we are overstaffed at kindergarten. Now, we're using that staff right now to stand up all of our ADAs, to provide monitors in classes. So that staffing is not going to waste. That's nugget number 1. And nugget number 2, I just want many of the newer board members, though no one's really new now. A year or 2 ago, and Ms. Burden is here, we gave all of the staffing up front at elementary. We were holding back on staffing in elementary, unlike how we did it at middle and high. We changed the formula to give it all at the beginning so you could get your staffing at your staffing meeting in the spring. And we did that this past spring as well. So in some ways that really benefited us in this pandemic. People got their staffing up front, not at the last minute in August and September when it's impossible to find anyone. So we're in good shape there. The last nugget, you are totally correct. What are we going to do if we have this largest ever kindergarten class? Because now we're going to have to hire not just additional kindergarten teachers, but instructional assistants for these kids. And I don't know whether Jeff has the answer today. I don't think we have the answer for that today, but I do anticipate many of those folks coming back, and we may need additional space. We may need to look at additional capacity. And I know people don't want to hear the T word of trailers, but we got to be candid. If all those folks come back on top of what our normal kindergarten class will be, we're going to have some space challenges at some schools. And Mr. Plattenberg can probably articulate it better than me. But great questions. Thanks for the feedback.
And I just would like to add that those staffing meetings occur in the summer months leading up to the opening of school year, and they occur every week leading up. And the regions work very closely with the principals, and at those meetings are HR, the facilities folks, and the regions, and we go over current enrollment each week.
Thanks so much.
Dr. Anderson?
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I think I was frozen a little bit. Is it my turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought Ms. Corbett Sanders was before me. I apologize.
I might have messed that up.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, you want to go ahead? Sorry about that.
Sure, that's no problem. And thank you, Dr. Anderson, for noting it. Jeff, as always, you guys do just such amazing work, and I am so appreciative of the level of data you provide us and the way that you cut the data. It's very helpful. I do have a couple of questions regarding, and let me lay it out. First is Mount Vernon High School decreases. Do we know how many transferred from Mount Vernon High School using the military transfer opportunity? Secondly, I want to talk a little bit about the centers and alternative programs, because I'm particularly concerned about how empty those buildings are becoming. I know one quite well because I went to high school there, which is where Bryant is. And the continuous decline, which is a positive. It's great. It means that we are serving our kids in their local schools, and that all of the changes to our discipline processes for the past couple of years have been working the right way. However, we got a bunch of space there. We know that we have space limitations during COVID to be able to achieve 6 feet social distancing and to be able to go with a hybrid model of getting our kids back into schools at some point. Have you looked at a more holistic approach to the capacity, so that if there is excess capacity in one building, can we start really looking at it more from a regional approach to say, okay, during this time period, we're going to have flexibility, and this is how we're going to make sure that everybody who wants to be in our buildings and can be in our buildings, we may have to send them to a different building, but we will have space for them. And the reason I ask this is because when I was growing up in this community, that's exactly what they would do when they were building a school. You would be sent to another school to utilize excess capacity. So maybe we need to think a little bit out of the box during this very challenging time and see if we can utilize some of the neighboring capacity. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's good thoughts. First of all, the military transfer, I'll have to work with the transfer office to get you the specific data points on that for you. And I don't know if it's off the top of my head. I've read through the attached membership report that you were provided, and I know it lists the individual categories, but I'm not sure that it has that specific one in there. But to the point that about utilizing other facilities, that's one of the things that Dr. Braybrand and also Dr. Ivy and Mr. Smith and part of our team, when we were looking at not only just the capacity issues, but also the staffing because of the ADA Tier 1 accommodations. If there are students that are coming back and there are staffing issues, I know that in the Mount Vernon region specifically, I've been asked by the regional assistant superintendent to actually look at how we could go ahead and accomplish that. We're working with our transportation folks to see what that would be like. Certainly, you know, we want to minimally disrupt our parents' experiences beyond the just natural, obvious disruptions that are going on. And that furthers that. But to your point, it provides us with some flexibility. So yeah, we definitely will be looking at that further. I already have had 3 schools requested in your region, in the Mount Vernon region. And I'm working with the regional assistant superintendent, Dr. King, on that. She's done a phenomenal job of communicating with her and collaborating with her principals and identifying any of the hotspots or issues that they see before them. So we'll continue to do that. I don't know really, because it's kind of early on with our phasing back in of the various groups, where those pinch points are really going to be. But I know that we are going to experience them for the reasons you stated. So it's an excellent point, Ms. Sanders.
So thank you, Jeff. That's very helpful. I would like to ask Dr. Brabrand if he could build this into his presentation on November 12th, that we have a little bit deeper discussion about how we can utilize, have a more holistic approach to our capacity during this very challenging COVID-19 period.
We can certainly start that discussion. And I know we'll have RTS monthly, so we can start that discussion next week.
I'd very much appreciate it. I know it's been a continuing discussion amongst the board, and I just want to make sure that we're all kind of working together to optimize how we're utilizing our space. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Anderson.
All right, thank you. Just a couple of questions and then just a statement that I wanted to make. One of the things that I'm very concerned about, as you articulated and demonstrated on slide 8, is Justice High School, the level of transience, the decline there, which is inconsistent with how the high school numbers have progressed. I would like some more details, if you're able to provide it, regarding the reasons for that school having such a significant decline. And I preface this by saying this, Justice has one of the largest populations of SLIFE students, and I'm very concerned, typically, normally at a normal time, but particularly more so now, because these are students that we may not be able to recoup in any way at all. Can you speak to the reason behind this decline at Justice, if you have any additional data? I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, what I would suggest, I mean, Dr. Anderson, again, those are excellent questions, because intuitively, there are a few things that jump out. So can I speak to it specifically? No, but I can say that in the document, in the attachment document, we do list data by free and reduced as well. And so there are a number of different categories that I think some of the students that are in, and we talk about this and from the equity lens that is the center of everything we're doing. When we look at the students that need resources that are not able to get them, we've done an absolutely phenomenal job when we initially identified them as a team to make sure that there was connectivity and so forth. But I think really what we're seeing in some of the data, it reflects some of those challenges where this pandemic has really hit people hard. And I believe, just from my experience, that is a lot of what you're seeing and that the data reflect. Although that slide does show percentage-wise as a decrease, it's not that much. But any child, any student is a concern for all of us. And we're working very hard to continue to identify where we have gaps or shortfalls and how we can address them. I know Dr. Presidio has been doing, and his team been doing an outstanding job working with the IT department in terms of the connectivity and the delivery. Our transportation folks have been phenomenal in support of that. But I think there are other issues that are going on that we aren't, we still have opportunities to reach students that I don't believe are being reached. Again, that's intuitive. That's just my thinking on the matter. And I think coupled with the data and the data sets in the membership report, in reading through that, I think, I know you all haven't had as much time as I've had with the drafts and review of it. I think there's some more things that might just come to your attention that I might even be missing.
Thank you for that. I also want to say that I think it's important for us to have some considerations, both in outreach and while we're discussing our budget, to ensure that we can bring some of these students back. I want to segue a little bit to our area. We have, as you know, a high level of transiency. And very often I found that historically our principals have had to play catch up because while we have one group that moves out and the numbers reflect certain things and staffing is made to be in alignment with those numbers, we have a new group that comes in, and I think often they're scrambling to catch up. It happened even last year at Luther Jackson when there was an influx of new students who came in September, and the school and staff had to scramble a little bit to help provide support and additional teachers to help bridge that gap. I want to be sure that we don't put our staff in that position as we're planning staffing. Similarly with the kindergarten, that we're accounting for these transient populations as well as these decreases that you've shown here to us. I really am hoping for very close collaboration with our principals for them to be very free to express the concerns and the challenges that they have, and that we are adhering and listening to that. I did have one other question regarding, I'm so sorry, I think I've lost where my other question was here. But I'm going to stop right here, and I'll take a go back while I find my documents, Ms. Tolan.
All right, I gotcha. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and then Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate Mr. Plattenberg, your great work here, and I echo Ms. Corbett-Sanders in saying the way you've broken out the data is very, very useful. So thank you for all that. I know this must have taken you and your team a long time to put together. So, some of my colleagues have brought up points I wanted to bring up. I just wanted to reiterate, Dr. Brabrand, if I misunderstood you, let me know, but Ms. Cohen brought up the issue of the kindergarten cohort for potentially next year. I just wanted to make sure we're looking at the long-term impacts of that, not just sort of next year's kindergarten class, but how that may look as they move through the system as a potentially very large cohort. So if you could just address that, I appreciate it.
Sure. Mr. Plattenberg has that all resolved as of 2 o'clock today.
I figured he would.
Yeah, I mean this, and Jeff will share what he wants to. I mean, this is why this moment we're trying to play, immediate moment. We're trying to play short-term moment, strategic in thinking, and then yes, this long-term. It's almost like a snake swallows a large animal. You can see it go. I'm being serious.
I know. I just hate snakes.
It goes through and again, I'm recalling my biology class. It goes through the snake, and you can see that bulge. We're going to have to plan for it. I do not believe Jeff. And Jeff, tell me if you do. If you've got the plan today, we can certainly share it. But I don't think it's complete yet. And what Ms. Corbett-Sanders said, we can begin the conversation. I completely agree. But I don't have the definitive plan of where we're going to have to. Are we going to have to move grades? Do we want to move kids to other schools temporarily for a year, add more trailers? I mentioned that already earlier to Ms. Cohen about the T word. But to be honest, everything is going to have to be on the table in this pandemic. And not just now. One thing I really appreciate, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, not only do we have to have a serious look at our short-term actions, we've got to have the strategic look that you're talking about, Ms. Corbett-Sanders is talking about, Ms. Cohen, others, everyone on the board, because it's going to impact us for years to come. We're going to have a big bubble in next year's kindergarten, and how do we integrate that through? And Jeff, do you have anything you would add? I think short term is we don't have that longer term answer yet, unless you've come up with something I don't know about yet.
No, Dr. Brabrand, you answered it quite well. And we use the term a balloon, a bubble that goes through the system. And so, the analogy is the same. You have these, and that's why I love the CIP being an annual review at a 5-year projection, because each year we can see what is trending and how that trend either tapered off or is sustainable. And when we talk about across the region, that's why I say the CIP season, each one of these other meetings that we have, the one where we have the development review, they talk about markers, areas that you all already know about because you live in those regions, and also you're informed. But many people don't know about what the planned development communities are. So we have to look both our existing reality, and the longer term projections of when those developments would occur and when the student yields the potentials to come from them. Dr. Brabrand, you answered that quite well, actually. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Next point I wanted to bring up, I appreciate that. And I just to be clear, I wasn't looking for y'all to have an answer today, although that would have been very impressive. I just wanted to make sure that was being flagged as something to think about. The next question I really want to talk about is looking kind of from an at-large sort of holistic viewpoint. I am concerned when I look at some of these numbers at our high school level, Justice, Lewis, Mount Vernon, South Lakes, Annandale, Herndon, Marshall, and somehow surprisingly Lake Braddock and Robinson, but really the ones I mentioned before. And the things I'm hearing anecdotally about student disconnect and student checking out and the increasing number of deaths. Do we have any thought about our high school students and dropout concerns and potentially dropout and trying to get them back and what that may even do to our facilities and projections? So the first, I guess, is the dropout concern, then I'll bring up the F concern.
Yeah, regarding dropout, I'm always concerned about that. But from my lens, from my lane, when I look at these types of, well, we haven't had a pandemic before to this extent, and this has never happened in Fairfax County Public Schools since I started attending at the elementary school level, which was a long, long time ago. So, you know, we do look at what is going on, and we try to identify. One of the things that I will say, though, is generally we usually see an uptick at the 9th grade level. And a lot of that is, I've heard, again, most of the data we have is usually anecdotal. So in terms of dropout and dropout prevention, we do an amazing job as a system, as a whole. But in terms of our trends, I'm not hearing anything anecdotally that we are going to be losing these students. In fact, what I'm hearing is that except for the data results that we're seeing at the high school level, a lot of students are preferring to retain virtually in the updates. But we still have for a number of reasons, want to get back in, whether it's the social, the emotional, and so forth. I think there's so much offerings that, you know, I know other folks in ISD are vigilant about making sure that they're providing the supports for students so that we don't have that. And we minimize the impact and the potentiality of that, because that sets up just a whole difficult challenge for a student.
Because I was more looking at the numbers from last year to this year and how the school year ended last year and what we're starting this year. And I'm concerned about whether some of these 8, 9, 10, 12% at the schools I listed are due to students we haven't been able to get back.
Yeah, I don't know if, for sure the exact reason whether or not we haven't been able to get back to them, but I know we're working on it constantly. I do say that we did have a contraction last year at the secondary level. That's one thing that I thought was kind of interesting when we take a look at that. And as I said, when we look at these bubbles, I look at trends over time. I don't look at just 1 year. This year, I do look at it because of the fact that it is such a demarcation. You know, the percentages you mentioned are huge.
So I can
Dr.
also,
Ivy, did you want to
Yes.
add something? Yes.
I could just add that each school has an intensive plan on how they're tracking students' attendance, and particularly students that are not showing for school, or students that need additional support, and particularly around dropouts and, you know, and kids who are in need of graduation or at risk. And so I know that we could get you more information on that, but we really are tracking that very carefully. We had a very robust plan prior to the pandemic and teams of people who would support this effort. And I know that that work is continuing.
Great, I appreciate that. And I guess really I'd like to get the information from last year to this year too, because that's where the trends I'm noticing from Mr. Plattenberg's report here. So I do appreciate that. I just, you know, any information you get as to why these schools that seem to have a higher free and reduced price meal population seem to also have a higher decrease in student population from last year to this year. So that's...
Yeah, most of the trends that we've seen, I'm sorry, Ms. Go ahead. Yeah, two things. First of all, our graduation rate was up. So we were doing, to Dr. Ivy's point, we've been doing a phenomenal job. We still have a long way to go, of course, but we've been doing a phenomenal job. Our graduation rate was up. The interventions and supports at the regional level and so on really made a difference last year that Dr. Brabrand presented in his back to school report. But to your point, right, Why in these areas where there's higher FRM? We've seen those trends when there have been economic changes and when there's been changes in administrations. We've seen lags and shifts that have occurred. And I don't have, and maybe Mr. Smith, I believe he has his hand raised, he might have something to add to it, but I don't have data to truly support because getting people to come back and talk about the reasons if they moved out of the area, yeah, is very challenging. I think Mr. Smith.
And Mr. Plattenberg, the only thing I would add is that we know these data sets, I apologize for not having my camera on. We know these data sets are going to drive our conversations around the CIP and drive other conversations this year, but they're also excellent data sets for you to have conversations with our region offices because they're much closer to the ground and certainly have more information about unique circumstances at schools than perhaps the planning office. So, certainly use this as a guide for some of those conversations. I know that you all interact regularly with our region offices, and this can be a good guidepost for those conversations, as well as those conversations that you may be having with principals as well.
Great, I appreciate that, Mr. Smith. And that's definitely something I made a note to bring up with the region office. I was concerned about the Mountain View reduction as well from last year to this year, and I don't know if that's a change in our discipline process, as well as graduation rate from last year was so quirky given how we changed how grades were calculated at the end of the year, as well as the waiving of the SOL. So it's hard to know how much is based on that. But I appreciate that, Mr. Smith, and that's a very good point. I also have one other question. Have we looked at the impact? I know we've been anecdotally talking about hearing a higher number of Fs at the high school level and some of this disconnect, and I've been hearing about pressure on our high school students to stay virtual. Have we looked about any numbers on where the kids might repeat grades and what that may have to do with capacity?
Well, from a planning perspective, as Mr. Smith had mentioned, the data don't reflect that. Yeah, so we don't have that information. Again, that just informs those further discussions with, as Mr. Smith mentioned, the region offices and ISD and some other folks to get them in for that conversation to further it. Yeah.
I just didn't know if that conversation was happening. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, and everybody in our facilities team for all the work they've put into this. One of the things I was going to bring up is the long-term implications of the ballooning that Ms. Sizemore-Heisner addressed. And I guess to that end, one thing we might be thinking about in terms of next steps or are thinking down the road, and knowing that there is no exact science to any of this, but trying to estimate what the long-term balloon might look like, even conservatively, so that we can think around what that means for our middle school and high schools over the next 5, 10, 12 years. One thing I did want to get into, and I think we've covered a lot of the ground for the main questions that folks would have on the report here, but an extension of this, this is the kickoff of our CIP season in the middle of a pandemic. And, we're beginning to dive into this capital improvement program. Can you talk about the unique challenges of developing a CIP in a year when there is so much in doubt, and what you're seeing other school divisions doing, how we might proceed with caution to both make sure that we're making decisions based on the limited data that we have, but also that we're allowing facility staff to continue to make their focus remain, implementing our return to school and making sure that we're doing all of that safely. Can you tell us about your thinking there?
Well, Mr. Frisch, I really appreciate the question. It has been one of the most challenging times in my 35 years of public education. When I share conversations with principals and the stress that they are putting on themselves, that the conditions are placing in their laps, and I deal with the regional assistant superintendents and all of the leadership team trying to support them, it clearly is the main focus of what we're dealing with. And the fact that we are educators that are being placed in a position to deal with health and safety, as well as educating outside of any normal paradigm in the history of public education, I cannot even begin to stress the level of burden that has been placed on people that want to do the best and want to support and want to make sure that each child has an engaging, enriching experience. And that's not only Fairfax County, but it's across the country and internationally. As it pertains to our teams doing the work for planning, we've reached out not only locally, but also regionally as a part of the American Planners Association and so forth, to ask what are others doing? And a lot of people are saying from a facility standpoint, it's prudent to pause, to be patient, to have that grace we talk about, because if you make a decision, making no decision during these times is making a decision, but making a decision that has a financial, a fiscal, or otherwise impact for communities during a time when the data set is not as clear as you would like, is something that you want to proceed with caution. And that's the only thing that constantly permeates and comes up. And trying to be supportive of all of our staff and the teams and the work that we have been doing around the clock. And as you said some time ago, Mr. Frisch, it's like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes, and some people are gonna like it and some people aren't. And those challenges are gonna be the same and fraught throughout the whole CIP process. But we're all in this together. Yeah.
Yeah, and to that end, I guess, if we think through what typically happens in the CIP process, we're making decisions based on our best thinking around where school populations are going to be. And with the added component of COVID complicating things, not only because we've dropped a significant portion of folks, but we don't know when folks will come back online. One of the goals that we have when making these decisions is to be to limit as much, limit disruption as much as possible to folks. So can you speak a little bit about the difficulty in making changes stick long-term if we don't have all of the data that we need to make those decisions in the short term?
Well, I think you said it best, Mr. Frisch. I mean, the bottom line is we have a backlog of work around that were in areas that this board had previously addressed and approved that is worth looking at. There are a number of work products, artifacts that we're working through for this body that was started with the prior body. Specifically, when we talk about the boundary policy, there's a number of things that we have to continue working with while we're in this pandemic. So if it affords us the opportunity to take a look at those things that we were working on and to continue to work in those areas while we maintain a pause on any dramatic changes that would be as a result of any of these, what I would call blips, because the data sets to me tell me one thing, that they don't tell me enough. Yeah. And what that tells me is, from my past experience, not to make any drastic changes, to your point. So I think there's a lot going on that we can focus on and have conversations about, as you said, when we delve further. I know that that's I think the beauty of having what was started a long time ago about the Infrastructure Finance Committee that's now striking up between the Board of Supervisors and the school board. That was an outcropping of a lot of the Plan Commission school subcommittee work and so forth. I think all of those things are things that we can continue to button up and proceed forward with while we know that we're dealing in a situation that's really challenging.
Well, and the flip side of the coin that makes all this difficult is that in some places where capacity is a real concern, this temporary population decrease may give us breathing room to pursue the solutions that we need there.
Yes, sir.
All right. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin, and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. I'm happy to follow Mr. Frisch in some of his questions. Mr. Plattenberg, I share your mindset that we really do like to look at trends over multiple years, not just one year to the next. So I think it was on slide 14 through 16, where we were looking at the changes in numbers. I'd like to start with the slide that showed the 8,000, it showed the 8,800, so maybe it's the slide before it.
Yeah, at the beginning, the 8,800 reduction.
8,800, yeah, 59. So why that's incredibly concerning to me is not just the impact that this is going to have on our facilities, but our budget. So I guess my first question would be to Dr. Brabrand and Lee Burden. You know, we're talking about not just the CIP impact, but if my calculations are correct, that could be as much as $132 million or more in estimated expenses and funding. So I know we don't like to deal with stovepiping things, but I almost feel like this conversation is a little stovepiped off of, you know, what's going to happen with our budget.
No, thanks, Ms. McLaughlin, and I'll let Ms. Burden add in. That's why in the presentation you saw just a bit ago, we kept level funding with the state, level funding with Fairfax. I don't believe as we return to school that these numbers at elementary are going to stay that low. I believe we will capture, if not through this year or next year, most of those people, I believe, will come back to FCPS. So one of the things we have to be careful here is not turn around, de-staff all of our teachers associated with 8,000 kids, and then a surge happen in September that we then have to go back out on the market and try to hire teachers that we just had with us for this year. The state is looking, let me just add, the state is looking, Megan, at March to do their ADM forecast. So we're going to get a chance to bite this apple one more time than just now and see what happens in the return to school. And as you know, again, I'll be bringing you an update next week. The first two groups are pre-K kindergarten, group 5, and then group 6 is first and second. That's a big chunk of where we're seeing the dippage. So we'll have some months of having that return to school model in place to see what enrollment impacts we have in bringing people back in.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. And I would just say that for me, as a follow-up to this work session, I really would like to see that trend analysis of this chart here, not just showing last year to this year, but really what have we seen in the last 5 years. I think that might at least give the board and the public a little bit better understanding of what you can sometimes expect to see versus how dramatic this particular year is. And I do hope, as much as you and everybody, that when we come through post-COVID and our enrollment numbers are there, certainly I'm not advocating that we change our teacher staffing. We know there's a teacher shortage. And frankly, when I toured West Springfield High School and saw a concurrent class where the teacher had 33 students, I think that is an incredibly high number. So I'm less concerned about what we're doing with our teachers. I'm just concerned about what we're going to face with the commitment from our local board supervisors who give us over 75% of our operating funds.
Yes.
And what that impact will look like. And I think that's going to have to be a real part of the conversation. If we have time, I would appreciate a go back. And
Megan, one last thing on the trends. Jeff, I think, went over a slide where he showed the birth to kindergarten ratio. That's a nice trend analysis, though, of looking at that kindergarten class, the take rate. We've been up in the mid 80s. We actually went to the upper 80s. And then suddenly we went from like 87% to 75% this year. That's a dramatic drop. I really do think that this is again, once in a lifetime aberration. But as Ms. Burden said before, the crystal ball is cloudy. And we've got to right now, the smartest course that we're looking at from a fiscal standpoint is do no harm. Don't over project, don't under project. And I do think by the spring, we'll have a better handle on the numbers if we're able to successfully implement our return to school plan as we presented to you all. We'll have a better handle, especially on those elementary numbers, which are the next two groups up.
No, I appreciate that. But to your point, the trend analysis for birth decay, I'd like to see that in the change in membership by school level.
Okay.
For this chart, I think that's still meaningful. And then Ms. Burden, did you want to talk at all about the 132 million? I know what Dr. Brabrand has said, but are we just going to wait till next March to find out what the state might do to us? Or are you in conversations with Jill Mondoro on the county side already about being held harmless?
As far as the state goes, yeah, I mean, we're statewide, they're about 3% down in enrollment across the state. We're slightly more than that. And they will, and as Dr. Brabrand said, they'll get another bite of the apple in March and take a second look at that in December as well, when the governor introduces his budget. But we do know that, you know, September 30 is not going to be used. The county budget is not allocated to us based on a per pupil cost, although certainly the number of students we have plays into what we ask for. But as Dr. Brabrand said, you know, we have to err on the side of caution. You know, if we went with a lower projection for fiscal 22, positions would be reduced, leading to a teacher involuntary transfers and layoffs. If a lower projection is used and enrollment comes back, then we would be in the position of trying to look for teachers very late in the year. And so the result could be larger class sizes. And so the safest thing for us to do is to use the same numbers that we used for fiscal 21 with the underlying belief that this drop in enrollment is temporary. If you know, there could be a large state revenue change based on enrollment, but we don't know the answer to that yet. But we certainly do not want to use these new enrollment projections to drive our fiscal 22 budget.
Ms. Burden, just to stop you, that wasn't what I asked, so don't worry, I'm not suggesting that. I just wanted to get an idea, since you're the CFO, what gives you pause about the potential 132 million, because the county usually gives us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars when our enrollment goes up. And we certainly have been hearing people in the public saying, well, if your numbers drop significantly, why is that any different from when we get higher numbers? So I'm not arguing to reduce our teaching load. We have a teaching shortage. I'm in full agreement. I think class size is too high. I just wanted to hear how you and Dr. Brabrand and your team are positioning yourselves to then help this school board position ourselves in conversations with the county, because it can and most likely will be brought up by the public at a minimum. And based on the fact that we usually get more money when there's more kids, and the inverse would be then the expectation. And so I just want us to be prepared to be able to speak well to it. And so I appreciate what you were trying to share.
Right, but those things are related in the sense that if we use the projection that we had for fiscal 21 for fiscal 22, then we are not going to show an enrollment loss. And that is because we believe that the current enrollment loss is temporary.
Yes, Ms. Burden, and because that enrollment loss is temporary, we would build our budget based on FY21. And this is the beginning of the budget process for the county as well. I've shared this with the county executive that we would plan to have build our budget based on a flat enrollment from FY21. And so the county executive is aware of that plan. But again, they're also at the very beginning of their budget process.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right, our next person is Karen Keys-Gamara, and I would like to point out to my colleagues that Deb has posted the link to the next steps document for this work session in the chat. So if you have next steps that you would like to add, please do that there. Ms. Keys-Gamara.
Thank you, and I'm happy to follow Ms. McLaughlin because I appreciate the projections that this is probably temporary. I hope that that is true, but as we deal with potential changes, I would like to see that we have a plan to make sure that we're communicating with the community as to how we're looking at things and what the alternative plan may be or how we're addressing if those projections are incorrect. I think in the past, there's been some concern regarding that, and a way that we can kind of buffer ourselves is to hopefully have better communication with the community, especially when we're having to look at such issues as has previously been mentioned, such as, and I fully support the use of existing space to try to deal with, underutilization in one place and overcapacity in others. As well as we need to look at those military transfers to see how that is impacting certain schools. All of those things suggest to me that we may want to have a much more detailed way of communicating to make sure that the community is understanding what we're having to deal with and really prepared for whatever might happen. I'll stop with that first comment if anyone wants to make a comment, and I can make that into a next step. I forgot to say thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, for bringing all of this. A lot of my questions have been answered, but I did want to say, I've been in some of those boundary meetings with you, and I know how tough they can be, right? And the community always feels like, well, you just figured this out? No, we didn't just figure it out. But maybe one of the areas that we can improve is how we communicate that.
And Ms. Keys-Gamara, one thing I'd say is I do think some of this discussion we're having now to explain this to our community, especially when I present the maybe even now as we begin the CIP process, just be candid with the community. Here's the state of affairs. We saw a dip. We don't expect it to be permanent. Here's some of the strategies we're looking at. If the dip were going to become permanent, we would see the following kinds of changes. If the dip isn't permanent, here's the flip side. We will see a bubble that will start in kindergarten next year and roll through Fairfax County schools for the next 12 years, and we will have to do some things differently. I mean, everything would potentially have to be on the table. Like you said, it's almost a double kindergarten class for next year, right? Or it's not double. Each class is about 12, 13,000, 8,000, 7,000 took a pass. So half the kindergarten class came this year, the other half stayed home. You'd have 1.5 times a kindergarten class for the next 12 years. You'd have to do some things differently in our facilities for the next decade. And so I'll work with Jeff and get that kind of strategic thinking. I think that's what you're saying. Give the community that framework now and don't wait and bury it and it shows up later when we're talking the budget or boundaries or CIP additions or trailers. So we'll work on that, and I'll work with communications in Jeff's office.
You summarized exactly what I'm concerned about, because again, we always hear that. Well, why are you just telling us? And I think the cure to that is to talk to people as things are happening.
Yeah,
so
I will work on that.
Do I need to put it in the next step? I'm happy to do that.
You know what? I'd actually be happy that you would put that in the next step, because I do think it's good framing before we even get to the budget, that they understand. Currently, we have half a kindergarten class enrolled under normal circumstances, if you will. And we may have 1.5 next year if the projections come back. So we're going to have to think about a facilities arrangement and strategy that works for elementary school for the next 5 or 6 years, then middle, then high. But elementary is really going to be, I think, part of the challenge where we already have some elementary schools that are flagged as overcapacity. Like Carl said, it gives us a temporary break, but next year we're going to be back in, right? We could be back in way over if we get all of our numbers back. So yes, I think the next step would be great, and we'll follow up on it.
And I would say, you know, I don't want to make our lives more difficult, but to the extent the board members can be a part of that communication process, whether it be something in a newsletter or whatever, that might be a consideration.
Yes. Yes.
So I think, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dr. Braber.
No, ma'am. Yes, that would be great. Please, the next step is wonderful.
Okay, I will do that. And then the other thing, just going back to the chart that we previously had up, I noticed there we had specifically, I think it would be page 6, 14, they all have the same category that I'm going to ask for some clarification on, if we can put that up. There are a number of categories, and then there's an other. And so I would like it, I don't know if you explained that already. I'm just trying to get the chart placed up so we can. Okay, if you look at the below FCPS total, and then there's an other category, which is fairly significant. And we just get some explanation of what that is and how it impacts the categories above. Is it interrelated or what?
Yeah, I can go ahead and it does in the membership report, it does speak to what is included in the other category. And what I can do is I can provide you with some additional details to follow up.
Do you want to just say it as a summary for the public right now?
I'm trying to find exactly what the additional note of the other was. That was my problem.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay. I mean, and I'm also looking at the footnote on the page, and it's kind of small.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to read this, what other is?
Yeah, if you could.
Okay, it says other membership numbers include adult education,
Multi-agency, yeah.
multi-agency, and homeschool and private school special education services.
Right. And I think the ask was really just a breakout within those. That's how I was interpreting it. But, you know, we can go ahead and try and see if we can give you some breakout numbers for that other category within each of the subcomponents.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Amesh?
Thank you. So first of all, thank you, Jeff, Mr. Kleinberg, and team. I mean, the report is incredibly thorough and well organized, and I want to acknowledge that. I think it's a model for how we can do this kind of work. So I did just have a question related, but not necessarily consequential to the CIP, but I'm curious whether we might be able to think through if there's potential for collaboration with ORSI or whatever appropriate team to do some analysis for the reasons. And I say that because, I mean, I think with some of these, it could be easy to say, well, you know, everyone just transferred to private school, or, and I don't want to miss what the data could be telling us in areas that we could, we could address for a lot of different reasons, not just capacity, right? That would be beneficial from instructions perspective, from, I mean, you know, Dr. Rayburn, I'm sure it would be useful to you in so many other ways too. And I'm really concerned about those kids we've missed that may not be amongst the cohort that's like, you know, just transferred to private school, that kind of thing. So, I don't know if you guys have considered that, or maybe if that's a possibility. But I really think it could be critical for them to spend some time doing that analysis.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I know that we have reached out with ORSI. I know that they're doing a lot of stuff right now. And to see if there was any inference, I think Mr. Smith has something he wants to add.
I was only going to add that we certainly have considered that work and have heard from previous boards about that type of analysis. I think that being in the midst of the pandemic, it's one of those things that we had planned to do had to fall to the wayside. But certainly, as we look forward, wanting to not only include ORSI, but to also reach out to our regions, because again, they're very close to the work and can provide a lot of information, as well as reaching out to parents and reaching out to families. So we have been surveying our families to know and getting very good information from them about the pandemic and about returning to school. But this is something that we could look at in the future.
And I would just add that the regions are reviewing this and will be discussing it further and do have information that they can add as to the analysis and the why. Typically, we would do this as a leadership team too, and time to fully review and share the discussions and reflections and data and so forth. But, we've had to prioritize a few other things for right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Because I can imagine, even with the facilities conversation, for example, right? It'll give us a sense of what's temporary, what's long-term, what's really critical for us to address now. And yeah, I mean, the implications. But I really appreciate the fact that y'all have been thinking about that.
I would like to just assure the board that the high schools in particular, and all schools, but particularly high schools, are tracking their students and where they're going, and if they leave, where did they go? Where did they say they were going to go, and did they actually arrive? And so that's all part of that dropout and prevention work. And so the regions can provide quite a bit of data around that for each of you, for the particular schools that you're interested in.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile to incorporate some of that into into our evaluation of what's going on. Because if we're able to ascertain that it's certain reasons, or kids have gone certain places or have had certain challenges or whatever it is that's led them not to enroll, then obviously that impacts how much of an alarm we recognize this to be, right? Because looking just at the numbers, it's shocking and it's worrisome, right? But if we can break down where and why more thoroughly, it might be both based on the qualitative and quantitative information that our schools have, and then whatever ORSI is able to kind of parse through technical analyses like regression and things like that. But look forward to seeing whatever can come out of that once it makes its way in the priority list. I know there's a lot to deal with. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Dr. Anderson? Oh, wait, you went already, right? Ms. Marin, I don't think you had a chance to speak.
Boy, that was quick. I just raised my hand. Wasn't quite camera ready. Thank you. This is a really exciting report to read, and I tried to get through as much of the report. I appreciate having the report and the presentation. So thank you, Mr. Plattenberg. You guys really do great work, and I'm not disappointed in your work effort. So just something I'm thinking of is like, the public, I feel like, is asking me questions of, who has lost students? Why have we lost students? And you provided a wealth of data. Is there just like a short story you can say, like you had to summarize, what's the story of this at this time? Is it that COVID is driving down kindergarten registration, but the rest is, we have a little loss in elementary, but it's not as noticeable in middle and high? Is that one story? And then I wanted to ask about comments that were made about, what if kindergarten students come back? I mean, how is the system safeguarding itself from all of a sudden having a flood of students? And we may have talked a little bit about this when we're talking about communications, but, just making sure people know we just can't have kids coming in and out like on a dime, even though that's allowed, but just realistically, we can't plan for that. So speak to those, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Marin. And, first of all, thank you for the compliment as well. And when I started out by thanking Dr. Brabrand, Dr. Ivy, and Mr. Smith, I really should be thanking Ms. Gillis as well. She and her team are just phenomenal at the short amount of time and running the data and verifying it, and just the amount of work that they put together in a short period of time is just amazing. I'm really fortunate to have such a talented group. What I'll say is pandemic, one word. The reflection within this trend is pandemic. And at the elementary level, when you have that much of a kindergarten effect of people not wanting to enroll their students, and at that young age to not have them attending, I think it's rippled throughout. I think there's more of that at the elementary level, and the data reflect it, than at the secondary. But I think all of it's related. I think, so if the community were asking me, I would say right now, this is a unprecedented time, as we all know, and it is reflective in the data that we have a lot going on in our communities, and we don't know how to proceed forward until we get this pandemic under control. And to do anything during this time might not be recommended by the wisest of folks, because the data reflects such a marked difference from last year.
But now every year we do have students where we see that bump into first grade. I know it happens in my children's elementary school, and our principals have gotten savvy about it. You know, Dr. Brabrand mentioned allowing for the staff hiring so that, you know, principals' knowledge can be honored. I mean, so that's not a surprise. I mean, and I'm not asking you to guess because nobody can, but, you know, I just wonder, could we expect that some of these kindergartners who didn't enroll will come back in first grade? Because that has been a demarcation line in the past, or is it just like we can't even count on that now?
Yeah. So, I mean, your points are spot on, really. And we do have dips at different grades. I mean, we usually see an uptick in ninth grade for some reason. And I've had parents tell me that they had their children in private school and they chose, prior to them going on to furthering their education, they wanted to have them in the public school setting for course offerings and other reasons. So yeah, we normally see some changes that are a little bit different throughout. But I think the majority of it is due to the pandemic right now, to be honest with you, and the economy as it relates to it. So yeah, the pandemic first, the economic conditions second, and stay tuned. We will continue to monitor, as Dr. Brabrand said. In March, we're going to have a relook at things, and we'll keep people apprised as to what trends we're seeing. Now, staffing wise, you heard Dr. Brabrand say, we were set this year to begin akin to last year. So currently, we're in good stead. We have the space, we have the faculty. The challenges are with the social distancing, with all of the other things going on that you're aware of. But yeah, we're doing okay, and we need to just be patient with each other and move through this okay period and see how things continue to unfold.
Yeah, so I think this confirms further our discussion from this morning with the fiscal forecast and the need to relay this to the Board of Supervisors. You know, there's a huge communications component of this. And while your work is, you know, very detailed, being able to lift out the big headline, or particularly our, you know, the funders who transfer the funds to us, is to say, look, we have made our best projections, you know, year over year. This is just totally different. Here's how we're trying to mitigate it. Because if you're saying that we need to maintain this level, then we need to make that case. So I would like, you know, to see us, again, it comes back to budget, but working with Ms. Burden on that presentation to say that and make that a compelling case.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Before we go back, I have just a couple of comments and questions. Mr. Plattenberg, you were talking a little bit about how, you know, we see some aberrations in the document, and not necessarily want to plan around that. But, you know, so I just wanted to make the comment, though, that it's interesting to me that so many of our high schools overall are seeing, you know, capacity reductions. And then we have, you know, a handful of those that have been declining over time. And then now suddenly there's an increase in their student body, Langley High School, for example. The other thing I noted is, and it kind of goes back to what Ms. Amish was talking about and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and trying to look at some of the reasons around some of these things. I noted, for example, some of the high schools most affected by net migration are kind of in the same geographic area, Herndon, South Lakes, Oakton, Madison. And if you look at those 4 high schools, it's not a free and reduced meal kind of similarity. It's sort of a pocket of geography, where we're seeing this trend. So it makes me think, we do want to have some of this more, analysis and telling of a story, but also, and just even, where I am sitting in Great Falls, our real estate market has changed significantly through the pandemic. So I know one of our next presentations is from developers and larger real estate development, but I'm wondering if it might make sense for us to also just talk to some real estate people in general around single family homes. What are the trends that we're seeing in these different neighborhoods as people through the pandemic seem to be trying to move to areas that give them a little bit more space or a little bit more room? So that's kind of sort of a big question wrapped up in a bunch of comments. I don't know if you have any to say about that.
No, I agree, and we do work with the Realtor Board to see if our thinking is aligned with them, and that's what's led to having the county folks come in and talk as well. So yeah, excellent points.
Okay, great. I do want to just throw in there too, just looking at starting up the CIP process. And on top of the pandemic, as a district, we're looking at making some changes to TJ admissions, for example, and that may have an impact on a number of our base high schools. So I had that as a next step, I think, around TJ admissions, but I'm going to put that in as a CIP as well, to make sure we're looking at any potential impacts to capacity at our base high schools with any of these other kinds of changes that we have. And then I also appreciated Mr. Frisch's comments. The 3 of us have had some conversations around what does this data overall say for our CIP process moving forward. And thank you for talking to that already. I'm looking forward to seeing how we can streamline this or what we really need to do this year.
Thank you.
Okay, we can do some go backs at this point. I think I had Dr. Anderson. I have right now, so there are several hands up. The people I have down for go backs right now are Dr. Anderson, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Keys-Gamara, and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. So Dr. Anderson, would you like to start?
Thank you. I'll be really quick. I just wanted to hone in a little bit more on the population of students that we have leaving in our high school pyramids here in Annandale and Falls Church, and particularly the concerns I raised regarding Justice High School. I just wonder, in terms of looking forward, what are some of the assumptions regarding some of those groups that I know are represented by those schools, such as high level of ELL and high level of FRM? How is that going to be part of our conversation in FY22? If Lee can just speak to that a little bit in terms of our projections. I'd like to have a better sense of how we are considering that population, even though they are migrating out of our schools.
Yeah, well, that conversation, Dr. Anderson, is exactly what Mr. Smith had spoke to about working with our regional assistant superintendents, because it's really what we found is working at more of a local individual school level, we get a better understanding of what actually is going on and then develop the plans to address them. And that's currently, I think the best resource for us, really.
Thank you. Ms. Burden, did you have anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why, our recommendation is that we use fiscal 21 enrollment projections again in fiscal 22. The last time I looked at the free and reduced numbers for system-wide, they are about 12,000 down on our projection. And you know, all of our classroom teachers have a free and reduced component that determines how many teachers that a school might get, regular classroom teachers. And, you know, the problem there, we couldn't possibly use the actual numbers because they, parents don't have an incentive to actually fill out free and reduced applications because the federal government has said it's free for everybody until June 30th, which is a wonderful thing that we can, feed everybody in the community. But, our numbers are way down as a result of that, and we wouldn't want to use those reduced numbers to drive any of our staffing calculations.
Excellent point.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Lee. And I want to piggyback a little bit on the conversation, Jeff, that you had with Carl a little while ago regarding giving some grace to pause wherever we can in this process. Rather on the workload with your entire team, particularly as we're talking about the CIP process. I would like to hear any considerations that you want to share with us for us to consider as we engaged in this. I know I have my 2x2 coming up very quickly. I'd like to at least ground my thinking and maybe expectations as it comes to working with your office into this.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I think I'll have to get with my team to exactly see the breadth and depth of it. I just know that everybody right now, including you all, it's absolutely, we're slammed. So I don't know specifically where we could look at that, because I know the expectations certainly of your constituents and our communities and everything. It's I don't have anything in specific, but let me go ahead and see if I can get something together and pull back and provide to the school board.
Okay. Just one final question. I know in discussions, and Elaine and I actually talked about this too, where we discuss other school divisions who do a CIP review every other year in lieu of yearly. Instead of annually. Is that a consideration that would make sense? Obviously, maybe not this year, given what's happening, but moving forward, is that something you would like for us to give consideration to?
Absolutely that. And in the case of this year, one thing I will say is perhaps a CIP light, if you will, just make it a skinny CIP. But yeah, those are excellent points, and I'll go ahead and talk with my team and come back with something more specific.
And thank you for all the great work. I failed to say that last time.
Well, thank you so much. Jessica and her team do a phenomenal job. Thank you.
All right, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Happy to follow Ricardi Anderson on this one. I do support Jeff, perhaps a CIP light in the off years. The Virginia General Assembly and the Virginia Commonwealth have a biannual budget, so I don't know why we couldn't look at doing something like that for economies of scale and efficiency of our time. Two things. One, I slightly disagree with some of the guidance that Mr. Smith had said about board members going to their regional area superintendents to talk about enrollment changes. I do think we can have those conversations, but I still think that in terms of the board's work and keeping it at a macro level, we really need to have the superintendent and his team doing this deeper dive in the data to understand where things are happening. And one example is what Ms. Burden just said in Dr. Anderson's questions about the fewer FRM students. What I'd like to find out is, I understand what Ms. Burden said, that the lack of incentive to fill out the FRM documentation, but wouldn't we still be able to take our list of identified students from this past year who were designated FRM and then do an overlay of this year of those students to see if they're still being identified as FRM or not? At least it might help us to understand how many of our last year's FRM students are still with us in the system, and we would have had them identified as of last year. And even if they haven't filed their paperwork, we would at least be able to understand that as of last year, they were an FRM student and they're still in our system. Is that possible?
The FRM eligibility per the federal government is an annual process. And so what actually happens is the applications from the previous year carry over until October 20th of the following year, so that students who haven't completed the form, you know, in the first month of school can continue to get free and reduced lunch. But it is an annual eligibility process, and those applications must be completed each year. Now, certainly, I'm sure we've got the data as far as who was free and reduced last year and who has just failed to fill out an application this year, but might still be eligible. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter because everybody is free. And of course, we have, you know, the numbers go up. Last year, I think the free and reduced eligibility number was the greatest special population number increase compared to the previous year. So, and of course, people that are newly eligible for free and reduced also would not be included or would have no incentive to fill out an application this year.
Ms. Burden, I appreciate that. And I did understand federal requirements and federal guidelines, but what you did answer for me is number one, you and your team actually do have our FRM numbers for this school year because they wouldn't have been dropped until after October 20th. So we did our enrollment through September 30th. So we should absolutely know what percentage of kids who from September, at least September, are FRM. And it might not be then the 12,000 drop you're talking about. When we set our budget, it is meaningful to know in terms of staffing what our FRM numbers are. And so we need to work with what we have. I want to see from the superintendent and his team the ability to creatively problem solve. And the data's there. We can't just say, well, we'll just go based on 2019 alone and just not do any analysis. And so I guess I'll try and figure out a next step how to capture that up there. But the data we can use without just saying we have 12,000 less, and who knows what that will do for our FRM staffings. And trend analysis is very important. I appreciate you bringing that up, that the growth in FRM year over year matters. Everyone understands we're in COVID and that the data itself might be in flux, but there's certainly enough of other ways to get data to drive our decision making between now and next May. So thank you, Ms. Tolan, for giving me this opportunity to round out my comments.
You're very welcome. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you, and I'll just be brief. I just had a couple of follow-up questions. I think Ms. Tolan actually brought up some of my points, but I wanted to bring up some of the trends that I'm seeing and maybe a possibility for more collaboration with the county, whether it's the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Authority, around what trends are they seeing or projecting around movement into our county. I know before COVID, there was a trend around higher, single unit housing and potentially fewer students. Anecdotally, I'm hearing that there's people moving from the cities back into the suburbs now due to COVID. So I'm just curious if that sort of planning and work have been done to sort of look at our long-term CIP projections.
Yes, great question, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, because the reality is we have and we do. And that's why the beauty of us having the meeting where we talk about new development, that always comes up about trends that the county staff are seeing. We do work with them on a regular basis, but it'll allow for that deeper dive, those probing questions that I know you want answers to as a part of that conversation coming up.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just be curious to see if they've talked about that and what impact that may have as well. And I'd just like to reiterate, I understand Mr. Smith's point, and I agree with some of my colleagues that this is obviously a facilities-focused conversation. I do think it'd be valuable for us to try to have at some point the COVID trends that we're seeing, whether it's facilities, whether it's in grades, whether it's in enrollment, capacity, all of these things, inform so many pieces of our work going forward. It informs our CIP work, it informs our budget work, it potentially informs our strategic plan work. If we're looking at long-term impacts of COVID, it's going to impact our strategic plan as well as our board priorities. It would be, I already reached out to my RASs to talk to them, but I think it'd be helpful to find a way to have a conversation with different stakeholders at the table about the holistic impacts of COVID and our strategic plan moving forward that impacts all of these areas. I just want to put that on the table. I don't know how that would look, but I think instead of doing it piecemeal, I think having a broad, holistic, strategic conversation would be helpful. It's not for you, Mr. Plattenberg. I'm just kind of putting that in the air.
Thank you.
I'll respond to that. I think that's something that we can certainly look at because we are pulling lots of different data. So thank you. We'll, if you could put that as a next step, and we will certainly review that and see what we can do.
And thank you, Mr. Plattenberg and Ms. Gillis and your team for all their work. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll put that as the next step, Dr. Ivy.
Ms. Serna-Kofa.
Thank you. I really don't have any questions at this time. I just do want to say thank you, Mr. Plattenberg and Ms. Gillis, for your hard work on this. I know this has been a gradual process to get these membership trends and analysis through the years, and we're at a point now where all the data is there. And I know sometimes it is frustrating as I listen to my colleagues' comments. You know, we don't have an exact answer for all of, for every issue that comes up, but we do have good data and good numbers. And I just so appreciate that. I have the advantage of being on the board a little bit longer, so I have been watching, my trends grow up and down to see the differences over the 9 years. And I might have some questions for you offline after that, and of course I will work with my regional assistant superintendents there. I do want to speak briefly. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser had just kind of awakened one of my frustrations for many years, and it's what's coming up, as my colleagues will see sometimes, is there is building and planning and things that impact our school greatly, but they are already done. And it is, and that if there was anything that I could wish from our team, and I know, Jeff, you work hard to do that, but it's kind of just the way we are structured, right? They, the land use people get to do that and the Board of Supervisors, but there are so many impactful things that happen in development. And sometimes I find out via community groups, sometimes I find out different ways. So I think it'll be enlightening to the board to see, once we meet with the county people and what they do and where the development that's going to be ongoing. But I think that outside of this COVID, which is what we have to be focusing on right now, like where are we going to be as a result? And because we don't have answers because we've never been through this, I think that then is, after we get through the COVID, we have to continue to work on that, try to work on that. I know FPAC works on different board committees work on it, but it's always something that I think that is what we got to get a hold of, because that truly impacts our numbers so much. Housing patterns, development. And we're still not where we need to be, but I don't see that happening right now this year because COVID is our focus. We're going to have to figure out where COVID has left us.
Thank you. Good point.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands at this point. Is there anyone else that would like to make any comment? I would just like to follow up on what Mr. Kofax said. I am excited that, I have been starting conversations. We started them in January between John Faust's office, my Dranesville supervisor, conversations with, Providence, and, Hunter Mill is right next to us as well, to really look at those areas together and development that's happening across those different areas and how it will impact schools. And, we're getting that whole team back together again to, kind of work together. So I just mentioned that as, you know, the type of work that I think needs to be going on all the way across the county. Mr. Plattenberg, I want to thank you for all your work. I know I've been in so many meetings with you over the last months where you'll say things like, well, I was off on this, you know, projection for the high school by 23 students this year, and I'm sorry about that. You know, your projections generally are pretty precise and come out pretty close. So I'm sure it's a bit frustrating for you to look at this set of data and, you know, see just how difficult it is going to be moving forward to figure all of this stuff out and what the impacts will be. So I really, really appreciate all the work and the data and everything that's put here together in this report. And it will be interesting to move forward and do some analysis of this and see, you know, what we can do as a district. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, just thank you very much for the opportunity. You know, as I said, the season's just beginning, so we'll have plenty of other opportunities to delve deeper. But thank you for today.
Absolutely. Mr. Frisch, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just thank Mr. Plattenberg and his team for doing this and our colleagues for their great questions.
Yeah. All right, great questions and concise questions. We are actually ending a little bit earlier than we had scheduled. It's almost 3:30 and we had until 4, but if we're done with questions, I think we can adjourn our work session. Dr. Anderson, do you have anything? Guess not. Thank you everyone for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Ms. Tolan, what are we doing?